Alrighty, guys. Well, welcome to week 18, day 3 of Hotel E&W Platoon. I'm just going to create the right folder because I created a day 2 folder. So week 18, day 3, and we'll just open this up in VS Code. So for the past 2 days, you guys have gotten an introduction to React, which is basically going to be the front end framework that we're learning. It's kind of like how Django was used in the back end to connect your databases, create APIs, pull in information. React is going to be the primary framework that we're going to use in order to display a lot of that information and allow your user to interact with your website so that they're not just interacting with it through an ugly GUI or the console. So this is something that I always recommend doing, especially when you're first learning React, is kind of walking through the flow of creating a React project. So, would anybody like to talk us through what the process of creating a new React project looks like? Again, this folder, I just created it in front of you guys. It is blank. And we need to start putting stuff in there.
First you have to do npm create byte at latest.
All right. So what does that do?
It prompts you to make the project.
Okay, yep. So that's pretty much it. It sets up a lot of the back end that we'll need. So let's see. Today we're gonna be doing props. So I'll just call this props project. And what frameworks do we use?
React,
Okay, React, and then what script?
that evil language that I hate.
So that would be JavaScript. Okay, great. So thank you for that first step, Adam. That's perfect. So the next thing that I'm going to do, before I do a CD, I always like to ls, make sure that my folder was created. It was. And now I just follow the instructions up here. So we'll do an npm install. Add a little time to run. It does usually take a short amount of time. And then after the npm install, we'll just run dev just to make sure that something or the other shows up. Okay, so it's giving me a bunch of warnings saying that I have an old node, but that's fine. And we'll just do an npm run dev, and it's going to open up the tab in my browser. And if we now go to the tab that I just opened, we see the generic React homepage, and I have my clicky button that's working, and all my logos are set. Okay, great. So we got our React project started. So this is a flow that at first it may take some time to get used to, but pretty soon this will become second nature, just like starting up a new Django project. Okay, so let's talk through a couple of the important files in here. What is the git ignore?
Just a file that it's going to contain any files, or I guess you'd say like not directories, but paths to files that you're going to not upload into GitHub. So like
Exactly.
files or API keys, things like that.
Yep, perfect. If you upload your entire project to GitHub, that's going to be huge. You don't want to upload every single file. You want to upload the minimum number of files needed that somebody else can just download, and then with very little setup, start running your project. People don't need logs to run your project. The node modules people can install on their own, etc. So it's always a good idea to keep those folders and files in them off of your GitHub. which is again where the gitignore file comes in. Yeah, Art, go ahead.
This may not be the appropriate time, but it's going to leave my brain if I don't ask now. Are we going to have a class where we are going to go through the whole containerizing this and uploading it to AWS? The reason I ask that is because Django files are easy to open and create, but the whole connection with the ports and stuff like that and getting to a point where you can make migrations, that's the difficult part. So are we going to have a class that's going to go through that whole process?
I believe we do. If not for that for React, we'll definitely do that when it comes time to combine Django and React into one application. So yeah, that will come up. And that's also again where some of these gitignore files do come in handy as well in streamlining that process. So yeah, that is a good question. Thank you for asking, Art. All right, so we talked about the gitignore. This is just your README, right? So the nice thing about React when you build a project in it is it gives you a lot of these files automatically. Like gives you the README, it gives you a nice thing with the packages included and the dependencies, and a bunch of other stuff, right? So a node module folder, we never bother about it really, unless something goes terribly wrong. Usually that folder stays closed the whole time. Public, yeah, in this case just has like the Vite logo. We don't really need that. So I'm just going to perma delete it. We've got the source folder, which we'll get into. And then lastly, we have the index.html. Index.html, as you guys know, is the homepage of your website. In general, we don't play around with the index file a ton at this point in your React journey. Instead, what we're going to play around with a little bit more is, well, is going to be the app model. So I'll say you almost never change main.jsx as well. So main.jsx usually stays the same. Index.html, besides like the title and stuff, usually stays the same. Everything else, like these things, these will usually change. So yeah, the first thing to note is that in main.jsx references running app. So what is the app class? Can anyone tell me what this function does in here? Besides Adam, because you've already answered. So what is this thing?
I think ideally what we should use it for is to communicate with the other pages. So you would just have paths to your other components.
Okay. Anyone else want to give it a shot? The only thing we're trying to understand is what on earth is this red thing?
Isn't it the web page, the one app?
It is. But
So it's
okay. No, go ahead.
so it's as you build like your title and your components and your images and stuff, you put it together on here to create that page.
Exactly. Yep. So the app is kind of like the component that makes up your web page. Now within app, you can have subcomponents. Now we don't have any subcomponents in this one. There are like native React subcomponents. But we have things that kind of count as them. So for example, this first div up here, that whole thing, you could probably create another component just for that, and you could call it like the the logos component or something similar, because this contains the logos. You do something similar for the for this card here with the counter. React is where Django is models all the way down. React is components all the way down. Components are the literal building blocks of your website. So it's important to know and understand what those are. All right, great. So we talked a little bit about what components are. You guys already know how to reference components from other things. Let's see what else is good to talk about here. You guys talked about state yet and conditional rendering? Okay, Art, you're shaking your head. Yes. Talk me through it. What is state? What does that mean?
Okay, remind me not to shake my head anymore. Yes, well, the let me see. Oh man, let me talk about conditional rendering because that's like more fresh in my mind. And I think the conditional rendering is like it's only going to happen at certain times. And I think like for any as an example, like let's say on your index page or your home page, you have a nav bar to direct you to the other pages. But once you get to the other page, then you might have another part of that nav bar to get you back home. So you might have a tab to get you home. So the conditional rendering there is that, hey, this code exists, but I only want to show on pages other than the home page. In state, I know we talked about it, but I have to do some more thinking.
That's all right. Yeah, well, your definition of conditional rendering is spot on. Basically, what it says is, hey, if condition A is true, render this. If B is true, render that. And you can extend that out. So, like you said, for example, if somebody has not logged in to the website yet, the banner is green. If they have, then it's a blue banner that has welcome, whatever their name is on it. And again, those are two different types of rendering. That's dependent on a variable of has user logged in or not. So that was good. That was good. Thank you, Art. Anyone else want to take what state is?
Oh, wait a minute, wait a minute. Is state more like we're talking about Booleans, whether it's true or false?
Mm-mm. Does anyone remember the idea of updating and managing state? Okay, so I'm going to highly encourage that you guys review the material from yesterday that talked about state. Today's topic is props, but the main thing for state is state allows you to track properties essentially of a component and update them selectively. So this is useful for, again, tracking variables within components. You can use it to share variables or as part of a system to share variables between components. And it also allows you to update your component. So for example, in well, this one doesn't do it, but you could create a counter app that essentially will update the actually let's see. Import use state from React. Let's see, do they use state anywhere? Yeah, they do. They use it right here. So can somebody talk me through what the red highlighted sections are doing? Why is it important that why do we need to use this set state? Why instead or use state? Why can't we, instead of doing that, just say something like const count equals 1, and then just replace all of that with a count plus plus?
I'll take another guess. I don't know how many guesses I get, but I'll take a guess.
You get until 9:30 Central.
Okay. I think the example that I remember is like, say, when we were trying to add a red box. So it says type in a color and it'll create a box for you. Well, we didn't want the input box to always stay red. We wanted it to return to a default value where it says select another color or select a color or something like that. So just like in the counter is going up and up and up and up, but when you refresh the page or it's a new person come to the page, then it should revert back to the original state or the 0.
Yeah, I mean that is very good. And that's pretty close. The main reason that we want to use states instead of just normal variables for a specific application like this is we need to re-render the component every time that variable is updated. So, for example, if I make a click, right, my count goes from 0 to 1 or 1 to 2 or whatnot. However, that's not reflected on my web page directly. It's reflected in the background saying my variable's been updated, but I need that variable to now show up on the screen. The only way to get the variable to show up on the screen in the way that we want is if we re-render the component that contains that variable. That's really one of the big benefits of using states, is if you change or set your state, then the component will re-render, which allows you to update it on the website. Now, that's kind of one of the big things to keep in mind for state is state allows you to re-render your components based on the changes that you made. So that's a critical difference between state and just like a normal variable. All right. Any questions about that before we move on to the last thing, which really is tonight's topic? And I know we've spent 15 minutes doing review, but these are very important things to keep in mind. Any questions? Okay, I'm gonna be back in like 30 seconds. So sit with it, and then we'll move on to alrighty. So let's start talking about props. So we're just gonna clear out some of the app stuff because we don't really need a lot of this for what we're gonna do today. But what I do want to do is let's pretend that we have a social media website and we're just creating like the scaffolding for a social media site. On my social media site, I am going to be putting somebody's profile on the website. I'll just make this like an H1 hello thing, and that's getting export. So yeah, we have this website. We're just going to be, the only thing we're going to do on it is we are going to put down hello, somebody's name. So in this case, let's say that Art is the one using the website. We'll say something like hello, Art. Now, that's great, because now we're saying hi to Art. But what if Nick wants to use the website and also get greeted? Well, sorry, Nick, I think we coded in Art's name here, so it might be a little bit hard to put your name in instead. Or Joe's, or Adam's, or mine. So where props come in is props allow us to integrate variables within our components to allow them to kind of like, I wouldn't say dynamically render, but in order to pass information between one prop or between one component and the next. So let's just go ahead and create a, instead of this H1 thing, let's go ahead and create a profile object. Profile. Now, again, this does not exist, right? So let's go ahead and create one. So inside source, we are going to create a components library. And then within that, we'll have profile.jsx. And that will go inside of our components. Canceled. What was canceled? Okay, no idea what that was, but let me just double check then my file structure. That we're all looking good. Let's see, cd source, cd components. Oh, that all looks fine. Okay, great. So we've imported useState, React, Vite. So let's also just import the profile class from well, let me see. Well, let me also ask you guys this. Can you tell me how to import something in JavaScript? No one? Okay. Well, yeah, now we just need to work through the file structure, right? So the first thing we're going to do is do a dot slash, which then gets us into our current directory. We'll then go to components, and then we'll bring it in from profile dot JSX. And that's the file, or actually, sorry, we don't need the JSX part. We'll just do it from profile. Great. So now the only problem is profile is not defined, right? So let's go ahead and clear this. We're not going to generate code here, but what we are going to want to do is we're going to want to create a function that's ready to export. So we'll do our export default, and then this is a function, and it's going to call it profile. And then we'll just have to return some stuff within that. So let's just try to hello art. In here, app.jsx is now going to return a profile element. I think that looks pretty good. So before we start playing with props, let's just make sure that this works. So, does anyone remember what the command is in the console to run React?
npm run dev.
Perfect. Yes. So it's not start server. This is run dev. I know it might be silly to emphasize it, but it is pretty important. All right, let's take a look what we have here. Ha. All right, failed to resolve import. Yep, that is because I deleted the logo. So that's fine. We'll just simplify this a little bit, take that line out. Ta-da! We're now saying hello to art. That's great. That works out really well. However, again, we want to build in that flexibility in order to say hello to whoever we want or whatever sort of thing we want to do to be flexible. So this is again where props are going to come in handy. So the way that we set up props, you can think of this kind of like an input to a function, is we'll just say props up there that are now input. And then once you input the props, we can then reference them. So props are usually input as dictionaries, right? So in this case, what we could say is something like name equals props dot name, and oh, let's see, name is deprecated. So let's just say like user name is the user's name from props, and then we'll just say return h1 and then hello and then user's name. So this way, whatever we input in our props is going to then get broken down to get the user's name, and the user's name is the thing that gets spit out on the profile page, right? So how do we specify what a prop is when we're hard coding our references to our components. The way we can do that, again, think about this just like creating an input to a function or an input to a class. So what we would do here is we would specify that user's name is going to be art. And this looks very similar to setting up a regular HTML object or an HTML block and just specifying conditions within that or subvariables. It's pretty much the exact same thing in JSX with using a prop in a component. So, all right, so I just updated my page. Let's start running dev and let's see what happens. Interesting. It looks blank. Why might this thing be blank? Do we have any ideas?
Is it looking for an input?
Well, let's take a look. So here, let me make this full screen. Wait, that's not full screen. There we go. So now you guys should be able to see everything on my screen. So let's take a look at what's in our inspect element here. Yeah, it doesn't look like our profile thing is showing up. That's super strange. So let's try this. User's name. All right. So that worked out. So we just needed to reference the prop directly, and I think that solved the problem. So now we have art in there because art is what we specify as the prop in here. Now let's say that we want to change it from art to Nick. We should change it to Nick. So this is a really silly, tiny example. Where is this useful? What is an example where props could actually be used? Well, let's say, we have the profile section is one part of our app, and then somewhere else further down, let's say that we have like a form field sort of thing, and then in that field you have a like text input box where the user writes down their name or logs in or something like that. Inside of that component, you could have an on click. And that on click could say, hey, when somebody types stuff into this box, update the name associated with that account. And then when they hit enter, like the enter button, then refresh the component to show their profile with their new name. So that's just, a simple example of the utility of props. Does that part make sense? Any questions about that? Okay, so there's
Omar,
another way. Yes, you go ahead.
oh, sorry about that. This is probably where the clear state would also come into play, because when Nick goes in to type in her name and submit it, she doesn't want to see my name in the box. It should just say like input your name or something, right? So the clear state would clear out my name, so it would be blank for her.
If you stored name as a state, then yes, it would. Well, right now we're not storing anything as a state in here. If we were to, then you'd be correct, yes. Okay, great. So yeah, that's a simple example of a prop. There's another way that we could have structured this as well. So instead of, we would still input it the same way, but let's say we have user's name, and then we have user logins, and we specify that she is logged in. Uh, let's see. Oh, that's why I forgot to put this in as a dictionary format. There we go. So let's do that. And then let's say that Nick has logged in 4 times today. So what we could do is we could say hello for the, what did we say that was? User logins. Let's say props.user logins time, then their name. Right? So if we go back to here, it then says hello for the 4th time, Nick, because that's what we specify. That's what we told it to do, is we now have these 2 inputs essentially into our component that are now both being rendered on the page. Now, I don't know about you guys, I think it's kind of silly every time you want to refer to a prop to use the props dot notation. Wouldn't it be so nice if we could just make a prop into a variable? Thankfully, the answer to that is yes, yes, you can. So let's now try to deconstruct our prop into 2 separate variables. So here, let's call this one username, and then make the other one logins, and let's go ahead and just make this equal, oops, to this dot props. The other thing that we will need to do here is we're also going to need to specify that this will extend React dot component. And let's rename this. Actually, yeah, let's leave that for now. Actually, we'll do that later. For now, we'll just stick with the format that we had before of having of referring to the props individually. I'll get to why we want to stick to this format probably later in the lecture, but for now, we'll just stick to doing this. There are other ways of doing it that we will talk about, just not right now. But does the concept of creating props, passing them forward from our from an input to a component, does that part make sense so far? Any questions about that? Okay, great. So there are a couple of different built-in props within React that are good to know. So one of these is the prop class name, which goes in, okay, which goes in when you're creating a div. So for example, let's say that we wanted all of this stuff to be within a div that we're gonna call, oops, that we would call profile or something like that. So how in JavaScript or HTML normally, how would you specify what div something is a part of? Like what attribute would you use? What I would probably do is I would just specify the div class, like so. Right? You just specify the class, and then you say what class this is. This could be like profile class. In React, we're not going to use class in the same way. Instead, we'll instead use class name, which is a prop. So just something to keep in mind when, oh, I forgot to resume my screen. Just something to keep in mind is when to do that, when you're using React. Similarly, React has its own version of onClick, which thankfully is just onClick, but with a capitalized C instead of a lowercase one in regular JavaScript. So some of these are small differences. There's a bunch more as well that I think are listed somewhere on the curriculum page, but it's just good to keep in mind what those default prompts are. Now let's think about how we can combine props and state together. That's always a little bit of a fun exercise. So, and then I know you guys already talked about conditional rendering, so we're not going to get back into that too much tonight. But the thing I really do want us to try is combining props and state. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is I am going to undo all of our lovely work because I want to be able to reference or start from our app. What I now want to do is we are going to change up a bunch of this. We're going to take out all the logos because that's kind of silly. And now instead of this, we're going to put in the profile. We're going to import that. And we'll specify your name. So just say user, what's this? User's name is going to be Adam, and we'll put that in brackets, and we'll make sure to slash that off. And let's rename the profile part as well. Let's call hello to your name, and then you clicked the button, props dot button clicks times. So what this should show is, hello, and then whatever person's name is, and then how many times they press the button. So we'll say button clicks, and let's just say it's like 5 times for Adam. So if we refresh that page, oh, here, let me just take out those logos again. Let's go back to Chrome. And we now see that, again, up here is going to be the new thing that I just created, right, with Adam's name and then saying that he's clicked the button 5 times. However, Adam hasn't clicked the button at all. As seen here, like the count should be 0, right? So how can I link my count changing and the number down here to the number of times I clicked the button in my component? And this is kind of where a prop comes in handy, right? So what we'll do here is we can replace the 5 with our state that we set up here. Again, this is a state. So every time that he clicks the button, the state will get updated, which should, in theory, re-update our profile component. So let's go ahead and refresh the page 0 times. And it automatically goes from me clicking the button to, oh, can you guys still see the whole screen? No? Okay, let me switch back. Aha, all right. How about now? Can you guys see the button? Okay, yeah, so again, before, we had hard-coded in that 5 times. But now, the number of times is the state that we are updating, right? So you click it once, the click changes the state gets passed as a prop, and the prop shows up when it gets updated. Do the second click, the 1 changes to a 2 because the state changes from 1 to 2. The prop now gets passed as a 2 up to our component, which then renders the 2. And we can just keep doing that. So this is kind of a neat way, in my opinion, to demonstrate how a state change can be passed in as a prop to update your components. Art, what you got for us?
I think it'd be really kind of a superstar to be able to put some type of conditional rendering in there. So if it's just one time, then there's no plural of times. So if it's the number one, then the conditional rendering says times equals just time.
That's a great idea, Art. So, how do we do that?
Yeah. I don't-
Well, because you volunteered the idea, so you get first pick. Go ahead.
Maybe like a can you throw an if statement in there?
We could do an if statement. What other methods do we know for a conditional rendering, or besides an if statement?
Oh, I don't remember.
Anyone else want to try? So you are correct. We could do an if statement, right? So we could do something like what's if props dot button clicks is double equals 0, then we will do this. No, and this is where me forgetting syntax is very helpful, but you guys get the point. Like we could do that, but there's an easier way to do it without needing to do an if statement. Do you guys remember something called a ternary operator? Kind of. All right, I see you're shaking your head. You want to take a stab at it? Or Nick?
Yeah, I was trying not to shake my head. Um,
Too easy.
yeah, I'm gonna have to like think on that one a little bit.
Okay, so let's walk through it. So a ternary operator is pretty simple. It basically says you have a condition, question mark, true or false. No, that's what I want. So a nice thing that you like, for example, what you can do for your ternary here is we could, let's say it's something like so props dot button clicks is, and I think we need to use the triple equals here, is equal to 1. And if that's true, then we would render times. If it was false, or 1 time, and then otherwise we would render times. And then this would go right here. So it's basically going to just check, is the number of button clicks equal to 1? If it is, then we'll say it's rendered 1 time. If it's not equal to 1, then 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, however else. Now let's go ahead and see this in practice, right? Because we can talk about these things all day, but it's more fun when the code actually works or the code doesn't work. So let's go back. 0 times, 1 time, then 2 and 3 and 4, etc. So you can integrate conditional rendering super easily into React using the framework of what we just did. But just make sure when you're doing that, you want to surround it by curly brackets. So when in your return statement in JSX, if something is inside curly brackets, then that automatically becomes evaluated as a piece of JavaScript code. Otherwise, it's just normal JSX. So keep that in mind. But that pretty much concludes lecture for the evening. We talked a little bit about props versus states, which again we worked out here. We talked a little bit about conditional rendering. Oh, there was one other thing that I want to talk about. But for that, I'm going to refer to the curriculum page. So, do we have any questions before we go through today's curriculum page? Just to make sure we hit everything.
No questions,
Great.
but that was pretty super stuff.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear it. So yeah, so again, we talked about what props are. They get passed in as key value pairs, as we saw here, right? You've got your key value that get put in those curly brackets. Super important to keep in mind. There's a couple of different built-in props that are linked to on the curriculum page. And we talked again about ternary operators for conditional rendering. Now, there's one more thing I want us to talk about, which I'm not going to code out, but which is very important for you guys to know when dealing with React. And this is the difference between a class-based and a functional component. So, remember when you guys were first learning Python, and we talked a lot about the differences between classes and functions, and how they have two completely different purposes? So, React kind of can blend them together. In React, if you're creating a component using a function like we have by saying, export default function, blah, 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 you can do the exact same thing by doing like export default class, blah, 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 blah. They both create the same exact object, whether it's using a function base or a class base. For us, and for you guys going forward, in general, people prefer to use functional components. Which is, again, kind of like, and also this is a good example of how to deconstruct the props as well. I don't remember if we talked about that, but that's a great way to do it. 90% of the time, you guys should be using functional components. If you're dealing with a legacy code base, or you're dealing with somebody who's very particular about using class-based components, then you can use class-based components. A couple of key things to note: class versus const or function. The class will always extend the React component class. The function can't extend anything. The class will usually have everything nested within a render function. Whereas for the function, you don't need everything to be within a render, and you can just run it normal. Otherwise, that's really about it. So for our purposes, though, we generally will stick to using a functional component. Okay, that's it for tonight. Any questions, comments, concerns before we wrap up lecture? Perfect.